go. Hello, and welcome to Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. My name is Elisa Gwilliam, and today I have the pleasure to be talking with Executive Director of MHA Dutchess, Andrew O'Grady, and Professor of Psychology and Director of the Center of Aging and Disability Policy at Mount St. Mary's College, Dr. Larry Force. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thank you for moderating this.
No problem. So today we're going to be talking about addiction, recovery, and wellness in our post-COVID world. So these have been definitely times of change. So Dr. Force, why don't you start us off with how the three of us arrived here?
Okay. Well, first, thanks again for doing this. And, you know, one of the things you'll hear throughout this is that the platform of the Zoom video and then out through mailing lists has been such a powerful ally in a couple of different projects we're on. So the fact is that I picked up the phone and I called Andrew O'Grady, who I've known for a long time. As Alyssa said, he's the Executive Director of Mental Health of Dutchess County. And he and I go back a number of years. And I call him and I say, look, we've had success with this type of platform of getting our message out to different arenas during a time of COVID. What do you think? And he said, yeah, let's go. So we had a conversation with Alyssa, and here we are. And this is the launching of Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. And that's what it really is. Mm-hmm. It's a way of taking a look at how things are today in the 21st century, not just based upon technology and the changes in treatment and our increases in science, but also in this COVID world. You know, one of the things that we talk about, and, you know, the overarching theme is addiction, recovery, and mental health and mental wellness, is that addiction by nature can be a very isolating, you know, complex, it's not disorder, because one of the things that we want to be able to change here is the language that's used. But it's a constellation of things that really can isolate people, both physically and mentally. And with COVID, you know, with the physical isolation, one of the things we've talked about is how do we go about getting this information out? And what we decided to do is to get this information out through the use of technology. Andrew and I have had a number of conversations across the years, and as he starts to provide you with a sense of his posture, one of the things you're going to hear is that he's a tremendous advocate, and I'm not just saying that because you're on the other end of a Zoom call, but you are a tremendous advocate, and you have developed an unbelievable network in the Mental Health Association. There are a number of these associations throughout the country, hundreds. And you definitely stand out as a leader. And I think that part of it is because of your commitment to the fact of break down the silos. Get away from the diagnosis, break down the silos, meet people where they are. So as we start this exchange and discussion, one of the things that we want to clearly say to you is the fact that we want to elevate this not only to throughout our local level, not only throughout our state level, but to develop a national discussion about how best to deliver services in a world that has changed. And I hear people all the time talking about when we go back to normal. Hello, there's no going back. There has to be a way of figuring out new strategies, new currency, new mannerisms in this new world. So Andrew, what I'd like to do is turn it over to you so that you can give a history and background of your landscape.
Thanks, Larry. I think that the use of technology is vital in what we do now, and I don't think it was the COVID experience that, it's the COVID experience that brought it to light. But I think we were using this prior, and I think we've seen through AA meetings and NA meetings on Zoom that it can work, it can help people. In our agency, we have spent an enormous amount of time on the phone with clients, and in actuality, they're getting more contact than they would have been in the old model where we had to travel to people's houses. And I think most clients really enjoy that. They feel connected and they don't feel isolated. And like Larry, like you said, isolation is the biggest problem. And while this is a video that people will watch, we will weave in some interactions throughout the course of this project so that people can be part of the part of the conversation. But these messages that we're hopefully bringing, and we're going to have a number of guests, will be able to educate people and help people understand where we are right now in the treatment modalities we use, how we do it, and what works best. The silos is a big thing for me, and I've talked about it nationally and regionally, as well as statewide, that we're just sitting in silos. We have these silos of OMRDD. We have silos of substance abuse through WASAS in New York State, and we have OMH silos. And our agency is merging. MHA Dutchess is merging with the MARC organization, Mid-Hudson Addiction Recovery Centers, which focuses on addiction. And usually those were two silos. Here we are, two sister agencies working in the same town, and we rarely communicated because one was OASAS and one was OMH. And now we've started this merging process, and now we have people in the MARC agency getting OMH case management from us, and we're providing that to them. They're also interacting with our programs a lot more, and it's opening their world up. And they're not in this little silo, and now they get to experience all of it, and the care is better. And so that's what we're moving towards. And it's a paradigm shift, but I think it's a wonderful one, and I think we're all going to benefit from it.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it is a paradigm shift. And the fact is that bureaucracies have a tendency to move very slowly in their direction. You know, how we ended up coming to this Zoomcast together is that Alyssa mentioned I'm a professor of psychology, and so I teach and I have a small private practice. And a number of years ago, somebody came to me, and I didn't know what happened, that they had made a deathbed commitment never to tell me that they were engaging in some aberrant drinking behavior. So I'm moving along, third or fourth session, and the next thing you know, the person is, having a seizure because they had stopped drinking for 4 days. They're having a seizure in an airport. So the cat's out of the bag. So the person comes back into my life. The family is rallying around. They're looking for recovery and treatment, and I refer them to a place that will go unnamed. And the person gets down there, and this person was a professional. In their early 60s, well esteemed in their career, but things had started to move. Their career had started to come to their professional career to a close. Kids moved away, and they started to engage in some late adulthood drinking behavior. The person is now lying on the floor of a national airport having a seizure because they didn't drink for 4 days. They come back to this area. I go to see them, make a referral to this inpatient place. Families crying, you know the way that this works. And one of the things we'll talk about is that, you know, all these types of issues, addiction, recovery, mental illness and mental wellness are all family systems issues. And families have a tendency to get better slower. And people have to have an understanding of that in the treatment intervention. And the other thing they have to have an understanding of that we bring clearly to the table is the intervention for somebody who's an adolescent is different than the intervention for somebody who's an adult. They look at time differently, they process time differently, and as a result of that, you have to be sensitive about that. So this woman goes to a rehab, goes to an intake. She's in her early 60s. She's in the place for about 25 minutes, and they bring in her cohort. And her cohort are two young females that are crack-addicted individuals. She's looking around like, what's this? What connection does it have to me? She gets so offended by this that she leaves. Now she's angry at the world. She's definitely angry at me for making the referral. She's bitter with her family, and left untreated within 18 months, beyond getting a DWI along the way, she ended up dying. That was like a wake-up call. And there were other stories. So I talked to two of my friends and colleagues, Jim Ball and Dave Brinkerhoff, because of the different skill sets they have. And I had started this thing, I think I called it the National Organization of Elder Addiction. And it was one of these ideas, but I kept it on my shelf. Now I come back, this case came to me. So I go to these fellows because I am a big believer, and it's evident here today with the three of us, that teams are extremely important. Everybody brings a skill set. And if you ever go to somebody and they say clinically or whatever, they can do it all, I encourage you to run. So I go to these two fellows, and the next thing you know, we started this national organization called the National Organization of Adult Addictions and Recovery, NOAR. And where this really came from is that case, but going back about 12 years even before that, I'm walking down Lexington Avenue on a nice spring night, and boom, it hits me. And what hits me? A question that I had been pondering and working through for a long time. Why is it that some people can, you know, master things in their life, really horrific things, and move on, and other people just, everything is so overwhelmed? And, you know, we have a friend that everything is overwhelmed in her life. Her car, her dining room table, her office, everything is overwhelming. But some other, and then it hit me. All the stages that we'd all been introduced to were stages, steps, you know, they were linear. You go to adolescence, from adolescence, you go to adulthood, but you never go back. Then it hit me that the one thing that was missing was the width. What are the things going on in those stages? And they're permeable, they change. And you'll hear more about this, you know, as we go into, you know, our exchange, you know, later on in the series. It's like learning, going to a French class. You're not going to walk away with an understanding of French the first session. But it hit me that these things were dimensions, and they changed. They weren't permanent. You know, they sometimes they were overwhelming, sometimes they were manageable, and they changed as time goes on. So I created this thing called a theory of dimensionality. And we'll talk more about that. And it's a here and now theory. It's based upon my practice. It's solution focused. Like Andrew, you know, he is really a strong advocate about tear down those silos. And we're both a strong advocate of, you know, moving away from being pigeonholed by a diagnosis. So I create this theory, you know, and work on it some more. But all theories are great, but theories need a practice orientation. And then in discussion with Jim and Dave, we created this thing called dimensional solution-based treatment, which you'll hear more of, 8 modules. And this is before I met Alyssa. And Alyssa, yes, is sitting here as the moderator of this, but she's also the founder and owner of the Hudson Valley Healing Center. And in my private practice, I've referred more people to gyms and nutritionists than I have to psychiatry, and I'm not against psychiatry. But in this theory of dimensionality, the belief there's an inverse relationship. I tell clients when they first come in what I call the landscape session, I am not your hero. I can't fix you. And the reason I can't fix you is because you're not broken. Because we all got, everybody has stuff. The people that concern me the most are the people that come in that give the illusion that everything is fine. That's a lot of energy to make that happen. So we move on, we create this dimensional solution-based treatment. And then the next thing you know, what morphs out of it is Intersections, a day program without walls. And you'll hear more about that. This venue right here is Intersections, a discussion locally, statewide, and nationally about the idea of policy, program, and practice. It's the intersection of aging and addictions. It's the intersection of community and institutionalization or deinstitutionalization. And I think that there's no better person, and I really mean this, Andrew, than you to be sitting here to give voice to this, because what you've done, not just from a theoretical perspective, but can I ask you something, directly?
Absolutely.
How large is your agency?
We are 240 staff members.
Okay. Okay. So I mean, you see what we're talking about. We're not talking about like a small little private agency that has 3 people in it. He's managing 240 staff members. And some of the things that you're doing, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things that the programs that you do.
Well, we have case management is vital. I'm the president of New York State Care Management Coalition, and I've been that for 12 years now. And the reason that I stayed with that, even though I took this role as CEO of this agency, is because I believe in care management. I think it's the thing that holds all our clients together. They need that extra connection in their life that's going to meet them where they are in their home. So when I heard about Intersections, I thought this is top notch. This gives us another venue, another option, and we hope to grow this because when I'm working in the emergency room and somebody comes in, I do a shift at the local emergency room. If somebody comes in needing treatment, I only had what I had in my bag of tricks to refer them to. And it was basically the same thing, no matter if the person was 16, 18, 20, 50, or 80. And it's just not the right fit for people. So, and there's so many other variables as well. So to get a new treatment methodology that we can draw from is fantastic. And I always say when we talk about mental health care and addiction care in this country, it's in its infancy. We don't know what we're doing yet, to be honest. It's so early on that we're going to look back 50 years from now and look back where we were today and think, why were we doing that? I'll give you an example. I had a guy who was in his 60s, bipolar, very manic, got a Social Security check every month, used it to buy scratch-off tickets. The guy didn't have a lot of money, but he was brilliant. He was brilliant. And every once in a while, his medication would not work and he'd have to go to the hospital. And he calls me one day, and he always prided himself on dressing really nice. You know, he couldn't afford the Ralph Lauren suits, but he always came across real nice. So he calls me and he says, you got to come up here and help me. He's in the inpatient unit of the psychiatric unit at the local hospital. So I go up and visit him, and he's crying, and not because he's now depressed or manic. He was crying because he felt humiliated because they had him use Scotch tape to hold his pants up. Now, I don't know the answer. You can't give a belt to somebody on an inpatient unit. That's a no-no. So they could hurt themselves. So I don't have the answer. I don't know the answer, but I can tell you that when we look back at this, 50 years from now, we're going to think that that was archaic and a terrible way to treat somebody with illness. We talk about the psychiatric center, the huge psychiatric center here in Dutchess County that's currently being torn down. And I think we have a picture to show you of that. That's a huge shift and a huge change. And we're hoping that, we can move on from there. And maybe, this is going to become, this is an amazing picture. I know Larry's going to talk about it, but this is going to become some, village that with a shopping mall and everything else. But I'm hoping we can get to a point where we could really look at the inpatient care that people get both on the psychiatric and the addiction side and do things a little differently. We need different levels of care. We don't need somebody with a mild depression that's just needs a med adjustment on the same unit as somebody that's fluently psychotic and throwing chairs against the wall. This person with the mild depression certainly isn't getting better being on the same unit as that person. So there needs to be step down units. There needs to be different units for different types of people. And that's what Larry's getting to. And that's why his intersections approach is very exciting to me, because it's something different that fits a different type of person.
Thank you, Andrew. And this is a picture that I took with my iPhone 11 about 10 days ago. I'm driving down Route 9. And we'll put up another one next week that actually has a tagline to it. And it says mental health at its best, tearing down the walls. And I'm driving down Route 9 and I see this, and it really grabbed me so much that I made a U-turn, came back, got out of the car and took this picture. And what is this? This is a picture of a main building at Hudson River Psychiatric Center. And when I took the picture and then walked away and looked at it, a couple hours later, the thing that really hit me were all those doors. And behind all those doors, were people with people's lives and people's stories. I spent just a little over 23 years working for the state of New York. And for about 15 of those years before I went community-based and then went up to what's called central office, I worked on the back units. And they weren't as tall as this building, but they had those doors. And behind those doors were stories of people that, I heard this thing one time that anybody that's been in an institution probably has PTSD. I think that goes both for patient, client, and staff, because they were horrific conditions. They weren't built like that. The interesting thing is that most of these institutions throughout the country are built about 60 to 80 miles away from an urban center because they were hidden. Dutchess County, where the three of us hail from, is rich with psychiatric centers, developmental centers, and prisons. And it's not because of a low tax base or the beautiful Hudson Valley. It's because they were hidden up here when they were built, and because there wasn't the infrastructure of the major highways. And now here we are, and this thing is being torn to the ground. And as Alyssa, Andrew, and I were talking about, what's the message that we want to get out through our exchange? We want to bring to the voice of the changes, the needed changes. And we realized that this picture kind of grabs it all, tearing down the walls, changing the way we look at things. I was telling somebody the other day that the history of these psych centers in particular, all run by MDs when they were started, all built 90 miles away, 60 to 90 miles away from urban centers, all with director homes and director staff and golf courses. And then we catch up to them in the 70s and the early 80s, and the MDs are gone, and they're all run by MBAs because of the fact that the shift, from the medical focus to the shift to the economic focus. And now here we are, watching this thing being leveled to the ground. The question is, what resurfaces in its place? And we're not bystanders on this. Our intent through the exchange, and I said this to Andrew when we first had the first conversation, I'm a big believer whoever gets to the conversation first helps shape the policy. So we're not sitting back, professionally or personally, waiting to see what develops next, not necessarily on that, landscape right there, but what develops next in the field. And I think we can have our fingerprints on developing something that is compassionate, that is cutting edge, and that reflects the time. As I tell my students, there's two things that you can bring into a family's life today. You need to bring in. You need to bring in your heart, and you need to bring in an understanding of technology. If you can only bring in one, you bring in your heart. But you can't act like technology doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. And evidence of that is having this discussion here. So I think, overall, I think the flavor is out there. You can see what we're looking to do. And what we're looking to do is to elevate this discussion to through a local, state, and national level about how to not only identify a problem, but how to talk about creatively solving it. And we're not looking at this as an academic, talking head presentation. It's an exchange. We agreed that we have 15 of these in our first season, 15 of these series. And today was the introduction and the overview. Next week, we're doing it Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And Alyssa and her team have developed a social media presence, a website. And we're going to follow the guidelines that we've learned in other projects, okay? The strength of a mailing list, that you'll receive this as a recorded video with some information attached to it. And what are we asking? For the cost of admission. The only thing we're asking for the cost of admission is that you circulate it through your networks. And before you know it, it just increases. In another project that I'm involved in, Proactive Caring, which is for mindfulness-based stress reduction training for families that have children with intellectual disability and family members. My friend and colleague, Dr. Jeff Kahan, and I were on this national Zoomcast 2 Fridays ago from this group called Access. And they have 1,200 agencies. And how did they find out about our project? Through our mailing list and through our video cast. So with that, Andrew, summary remarks?
It's just exciting, and I think if people stick with this and watch what we're doing and see who we're talking with, you're right. I've always been one to want to shape change and policy, not to sit back and wait for it to happen, like you said. I'm on calls regularly right now through my state affiliations with state DOH officials and OMH officials on trying to figure out what we've learned from this COVID experience, what worked, but that we can carry over if this ever gets back to a quote normal time. And I'm part of that. In our agency, I encourage all staff in our agency to just get ahead of things, make suggestions, talk to us. Let's get ahead of things like AI, and let's figure out how artificial intelligence can help us move the needle along in this treatment that we do that I still believe is in our infancy. And this is just one aspect of that. And I'm very excited to be part of this. MHA is very excited to be part of it. And I think we can bring some knowledge and we can make some change through this process.
Absolutely. And that takeaway message, that you just gave is, look, getting ahead of it. We have a list of invited guests. If you feel as though that there's somebody that should be sitting here talking with us, including yourself, let us know. We're open, for exchange. We're open for suggestions. And we're definitely, we're in this all together. So thank you. So Alyssa,
Thank you both. And thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Intersections Policy Program and Practice Exchange. And if you want to hear this program again, share it with friends, or even comment on it, you can do so on our website, www.intersections-exchange.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And while you're on our website, make sure you sign up for our newsletter so you can get on our mailing list. We hope you join us again next week as we continue our conversations on intersections, policy, program, and practice exchange.